As a professional involved in electricity delivery, the T&D World Podcast and tdworld.com is your definitive source for breaking news, industry updates, and more. We've got you covered from transmission to distribution and everything that affects the power grid. And now, on to today's episode.
Hello, and welcome to the T&D World Live Podcast. I'm Jeff Postlewaite, Managing Editor with T&D World. And today we are excited to have Scott Corwin, who is President and CEO of APPA, the American Public Power Association, which, as you probably already know, advocates for public utilities, their policies, their interests, and this just sort of looks out for what they're looking out for. So thanks for joining us, Scott.
Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, it's great. We were just talking about how we were both sort of Pacific Northwest based. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the particular challenges in that region later on. But to start with, I was listening to some FERC commissioners speaking, and one of the things that they, despite their partisan, divides, the things that they tend to agree on is that we really do need to build our way out of the current problems that the power grid has. So if you could you describe some of the issues that the power grid is facing and what's the impact of those on the larger economy?
Absolutely. Yeah. And when you say build our way out, in that context, they're describing the one big thing that's been looming, which is that supply hasn't been keeping up with demand, or at least the rate of demand increase in both generation and the need for additional transmission. So you've got your basic supply demand curve, and then you've got congestion that comes from that as well that impacts reliability and affordability. So that's how you get at that is different in a lot of different areas. But and we've got in public power, there's about 2,000 of these community-owned utilities across 49 states and 5 territories. So a lot of different regions, but most regions are seeing some version of this same dynamic right now. And as demand rises for various reasons, certainly data centers and electrification overall, you've got to get more creative and bring on new resources, but also look for efficiencies. And for centuries, that's been, reliable, affordable electricity has been the hallmark of our industry. We've met challenges before, going all the way back to World War II, where you had a huge increase in the need for the war effort and electricity. But this is new and a new generation of challenges. And so we're trying to meet the moment. In public power, we really would like to be able to, a lot of these areas, you'll see some of the largest growth in public power communities happening, and we really like to be able to meet that challenge and are working to do that. But it's going to take some focus on what the tools are that are necessary now.
Right. We at T&D World, we talk a lot about those supply chain issues, but there's also labor shortages, there's NIMBYism, red tape, and there's a lot of other factors that are holding up transmission construction or new projects getting off the ground. What can permitting reform do to address some of these constraints on building out new infrastructure?
Yeah, permitting reform, the part of it is focused on the process and the timelines that have really gotten longer and longer over the years as some of these laws passed in the early 70s really haven't been amended significantly that create our permitting structure, at least at the federal level. So the longer it takes on the timeline, the more you run into supply chain issues just on your ability to plan and acquire, and you also run into cost issues. So that that and the uncertainty that the longer timelines in the permitting process create right now makes it difficult from a planning perspective, from a utility management and operational perspective. And again, it hits reliability and affordability. So yeah, that being able to focus on not, and there's supply chain issues on top of that, but being able to get at new infrastructure on timelines that line up more sensibly with the way utilities need to operate to meet this new demand is really critical. And there's I can give you a few examples of what we're focused on the federal side on that. One is sensible NEPA, or National Environmental Policy Act reforms. This is an area where the timelines have gotten real long, and also just the ability to have stability legally over time and not subject to the changes in administrations or political change. That's another reason for getting the actual laws changed and permitting reform rather than regulatory change alone. As you know, these are projects built to last decades, not just a few years. And so that planning certainty and ability to rely on that really matters. And getting through the process in real time helps that as well. So on the NEPA side, the SPEED Act, HR 4776, we'd like to see there is some progress there, and there's bipartisan movement, but we'd like to see that, which limits some of the scope of review. It still allows review, certainly. We refer to smart permitting reform and still having review. You need review physically and structurally as well for the system, but also environmentally. But cornering that in a little more to where you have more specificity to the action or to the project that is being built. So, the major federal actions are defined a little more specifically. The exclusions to NEPA, categorical exclusions, are also defined and made a little more reliable as far as the planning purpose. Actions that are reasonably foreseeable to occur are defined a little better in this legislation. And then putting timelines on the actual shot clocks on the actual process and on when you can challenge in litigation as well helps to corner that in a little bit. And then there's a similar bill, the Permit Act for the Clean Water Act as well, to try to create a little more reliability and timeline reliability in that process. And also to bolster, there's a national permitting process that could be used more too. So you're standardizing some of this across a broader footprint, and that makes it easier for developers as well.
Right. Yeah. You've brought up federal policy. So, a lot of the time, pressure groups, industry groups, publicly funded utilities will call for action from Washington. But, obviously there's a lot of inaction, dysfunction there, gridlock. The government itself is, having or had its extended shutdown. So what role would you say that policymakers have to play here? And maybe what can be done in the absence of them taking any action?
Sure. Well, first, I guess on taking action, I'm always optimistic. It was close last session. You've got a strong bipartisan effort currently, including on that speed bill that I mentioned, led by Chairman Westerman and also with Representative Golden in the House. So bipartisan to start with, and then they're bringing in more folks from each caucus, I think, as they go. And that's because you can see this broad need and therefore broad support in districts across the country trying to get things built to meet this new demand and wanting to do so responsibly, but wanting it to be able to rely on it. So I think you'll see progress there, and we have so far. Then you have, even without legislative change, As I mentioned, you've seen some regulatory change to try to move things along where they can, but you also have as far as what policymakers can do, they also have an oversight role. Some of these laws can be implemented in inconsistent ways, even in various offices of the federal agencies, depending upon the region you're in or the locality and area. So that kind of oversight in keeping track of exactly how the laws are being implemented and whether they could be more efficient even under the current legal structure is a good place to focus. And then you also have the ability, of course, they have the power of the purse, and in some of these bills that have been moving through are able to emphasize that they want to see the agencies focus on getting some of these projects built to meet this demand. So administratively, and then also focus and work with the local and state entities as well, because the state governments, have an important role as well in permitting at that level. And so policymakers there can certainly be helpful too.
Sure, certainly. Well, as we go out to like conferences or have conversations here on this podcast, people like to often they call for cooperation or collaboration within the industry to sort of solve some of these problems. I get that a lot as an answer, but what form do you see that actually taking? Like how do stakeholders get together and find common ground and sort out their differences among one another and move forward on points where they find agreement? I know that's a vague, a wide-ranging question, but I guess I'm interested in where the rubber meets the road here as far as APPA is concerned and getting some of these new projects off the ground.
Yeah, we try to work as a facilitator for that ourselves at APPA and collaborate across the industry and with other stakeholders, and certainly participate in venues where that happens. Certainly with the other trade associations on the energy side, but also I was at a meeting the other evening with a coalition of data center interests and others that, obviously would like to see movement in some of these areas as well. We're diverse enough, and geographically, we really, in public power, are using all generation resources and need all resources moving forward to meet this challenge. And so that also brings in a lot of other interest across industry, regardless of what generation resources they may be representing. And then certainly can see the need on the transmission side as well. So that collaboration happens. It certainly happens in Washington, D.C., where folks are trying to figure out how you get a coalition together on a bipartisan basis on this issue, for example, to get real legislation through. But we also see it locally. For example, when a large new project, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a data center, it can be can be residential development or others. But when they come into our communities, in a public power community, by its very nature, it is a collaborative process working with the city and county governments, local economic development folks. It's working with landowners and then the other agencies locally that need to look at the permitting. And so you do see a lot of that happen naturally across the industry.
Right. You've mentioned a couple of times in passing the big question of AI and the accompanying energy demand of that growing sector of the economy. So I guess I've been wondering how utilities feel about this. I'm sure there's a lot of utilities out there who see great potential here with the growing load growth. And then there are maybe others who are wondering, well, how does this work for us? How are we going to meet this challenge? So maybe you can explain to me what the public utilities feel when they come to you and talk about this issue.
Sure. Well, AI has a couple different aspects to it. So our utilities are all evaluating their own use cases as well for AI. It's part of their operations and management, administration, and you can, that's a whole and even grid management itself as applying AI to try to come up with even better solutions to how the load growth on the system impacts the grid, and managing in real time that way. As far as local communities and reaction to the large data center loads or AI-driven data center loads, which is a newer development. Obviously, we've had communities that have had data center loads for a long time now, ever since data centers started being created. And we're public power communities. We're in some of those areas, especially where you saw that in California, and build out from there. With these new centers, it really depends on the local community. So some are clearly embracing it. We've got like I said, some of the areas where you see some of the largest rates of growth in the country, especially some areas across the South, now up through the Midwest. And then, and like I said, it started earlier on in the far West and in the Northwest too, speaking of that, where we're from, along the Columbia River there. And then you've got other communities where it may not be as good a fit, or they're a relatively small community and may not have staffed up yet to be able to assess and determine the operational needs. But where they've decided it makes sense and there's a good partnership, they've done a good job coming up with those constructs in the proper contractual terms, the proper rates, the proper provisions if there's an exiting or exit fee, so you don't have those stranded costs or impacts to the customers, the base load customers that in those communities. So they're working through a lot of those issues, and in some areas you've seen enormous growth where it's been a real successful partnership.
Right. Yeah. Well, I saw that APPA recently conducted a survey at the request of the Department of Energy on the roadblocks that utilities face in planning or implementing energy infrastructure projects. I don't know where the work is there at the moment, but can you tell me what some of the findings may be there, or learnings that may be there?
Yeah, we're pulling that together still to create a better summary, and we wanted to get as much of the responses as we could in before we release it back out. But the types of things you've seen are what you would expect on this issue, where you have pretty long timelines to get through a permitting process, and not just on transmission projects that get held up in certain areas, but on generation as well. And we've known for a long time, certainly on, for example, relicensing and licensing of nuclear plants, of hydropower projects, that can drag out, a decade or longer. But yeah, we're getting a good array of different examples back of where it's just things that it's either it's the types of things that we've highlighted on the need for permitting reform in the first place, but things that get held up for analysis paralysis, additional studies, held up on multiple steps within different agencies or even within the same agency, and then sometimes by challenges. But a lot of these are just the upfront process that is arduous.
Right. Could you tell me a little bit about the reliability issues that may be springing up with the bottleneck in new transmission constructions, and just the challenges in getting project siting done? Just how basically the situation as it has been, the status quo right now.
Sure. Yeah, and really that's transmission and generation causing
Sure.
some of the reliability concerns, and the location of both. But it's been, we've operated really reliably for a long time. And by world standards, of course, the United States has a very reliable system overall. Public power, by the way, rates real highly on reliability as far as local utilities as well. But they increasingly you have this concern, and NERC has raised this in all of their reliability assessments recently, in the summer reliability assessment, and then in this winter one just this week or last week as well, that you have increasing instances of near misses and small events and also you can see where the potential on those peak days, the coldest days in the winter, the hottest days in summer, the potential for that lack of resource adequacy catching up to us. And that's a real concern when you combine it with extreme weather events that we've seen a lot of in recent years, wildfires, the other things that impact the system. And so, again, it goes back to supply and demand, but also the need to manage the system real proactively, especially during those times where you're at increased risk. So it's not just, there's multiple factors. It's not all just that demand supply curve, but it is certainly an increasing concern. And like I said previously, it's not just in one or two regions. It can be more poignant in one region in any one season, but it's really across every region of the country right now where you see increasing concern.
Right. Well, speaking of regional differences, I saw that before you were named president and CEO at APPA, you were director of the Northwest Public Power Association, just north of me in Vancouver, Washington. Could you tell me anything about what special challenges or advantages we have here in the Pacific Northwest when it comes to our power infrastructure?
Sure. I mean, one advantage right off the bat is that large percentage of hydropower that I mentioned peripherally earlier, but that and not just federal hydropower, but private and other hydropower as well, really creates a nice backbone for the Northwest because of the particular aspects of hydropower itself. The fact that, and it's not just clean and efficient. It has that capacity to follow load that we talk about that is not true of every generation resource. And so when you're looking at these times of higher constraints on the system or congestion or reliability concerns, in the Northwest, it's often that hydropower system that can lean on to be able to fill in and meet that need for instantaneous demand during those critical hours. So that's a nice, and you've got the one nuclear plant as well that is good baseload piece of generation as well, and then gas filling in, and in addition to a lot of wind and increasingly solar that's come in the Northwest. So it's got a nice portfolio. It doesn't have, and it's an interesting area, as you know, because it does not have a regional transmission operator, independent system operator like a lot of other areas of the country. But it's increasingly also finding ways to make use of markets, either to the south or south and west to try to get efficiencies as well.
Right. Yeah. Well, while I have you here and we're already talking about power generation, which, normally we don't talk too much about, but because of the reliability issue, we really have to think more and more about it, as I'm sure utilities do too. So, what do you think about the possibility of more potential more development happening on the nuclear side of things? Whether it might be small modular or whether it might be new nuclear. I know these things may be a little bit further down the pike, but we also have to think in terms of decades. So I don't know. I was wondering what you think about maybe the nuclear industry getting more chatter happening around them lately.
Yes, there's been a lot of talk about new nuclear lately, and then support from the federal government as well. And public power is involved in several of the projects. So there's a lot of momentum in that respect for the potential for nuclear into the future, and specifically among public power entities. You also had, on the more traditional form, you had public power down in Georgia involved with the last, large reactor built, and then on the small modular reactor or advanced nuclear side, in several different areas, involvement with public power. And yeah, and for some of those same reasons I was talking about, those aspects that hydropower lends for balancing the system, you see that potential, and certainly in small modular reactors as well, that are built in part for that, or the designs are focused in part for that purpose specifically, that being able to ramp up and down, a little more flexibility in application. And eventually, like I said, it's a little bit in the future still, but as you see some of these models start to become the standardized version and become replicated, the idea is you'll be able to have a lot more applications in a lot of different areas, and also the cost will come down.
Yeah, I was talking with someone in the DOE loan office, and they said sometimes the problem is that nobody really wants to be first with this sort of thing. They would prefer to be fifth, but I guess that's the challenge that we have. Um, So regulators, they have their job to do. The industry wants to get new projects built. How do we sort of strike the right balance between good regulation and project timelines? If projects take too long, maybe nuclear is an example of this, but if projects drag on too long, it increases the odds that, key backers might just pull up stakes and the whole project could go under. We've seen that happen before. So how do we strike that balance?
Yeah, I think we're on the right track with some of the permitting streamlining legislation that's underway, and also some of the regulatory focus on it. Because you're right, it's a balance, and certainly you want to have adequate environmental review. You also need adequate. This is a unique commodity in some ways, but one way is it will have to follow the laws of physics, and you need to plan for that, and it's sometimes a complex set of considerations in making sure that the grid is stable, and that you're building in the places where it makes sense, and that it's going to be sustainable over time. So that's why we talk about smart permitting reform, where you're getting at the process, but the product is still a good one on the back end, and it's just about capturing some of those efficiencies and getting there. And it's too critical of a commodity to fail in the end. So that's why I do think the balance will be. I think we're striking it. We have historically balanced the considerations to get the power when we've needed it, and that's why the system has been so reliable over time, regardless of swings in the economy or different trends that have come along in various areas on use of electricity. But it is a new era, and the level of data centers, it's a whole different scale that we're talking about when you're talking gigawatts, instead of what historically, a large facility might have been, 100 megawatts. And so, this is, you need to be innovative. We need to be nimble, and public power is ready to address that challenge. But, that's what I mentioned before, too, on striking that balance between the need for not just getting the regulatory construct in place, but also the relationships with the loads to the rest of the system contractually, and and operationally so that it all works well.
You're right. You see some of these numbers and some of these forecasts, and it can get pretty frightening. I mean, when you're talking about the scale of it, we talk all the time on this podcast about the pressures that the power grid is under with, electrification, AI, new home construction. Time is a factor here. So I guess my last question for you would be, how do we get the timely reform that we need to get new projects off the ground in the amount of time that it's going to be required? Because it does sort of seem like increasingly like a ticking clock.
Yeah, and I think the timeliness comes from the certainty. Right now, if we can get a better certainty for folks in the process and standardize not just the permitting, but also the approaches to how we're going to what we're going to build, how we're going to get it to load, and then the relationship with the loads themselves. I think that will make all of this move quicker. If we'd had more significant permitting reform, for example, 5 years ago, the timeliness wouldn't be as big a concern now. So I think we get there through that. It's a huge part of it, just to be able to rely on that planning and the actual construction timelines and the materials you're bringing in, and I think that also brings down costs as well as the timelines. So, we're on the public power side of that, being community owned and responsive to the community. When we're involved in these projects, it's building a lot of community support, which is important from a timeliness standpoint too. So you're not held up on some of those issues where you have the opposition. And so where those communities want to move forward, public power is going to make sure that that they're lining up what needs to be in place, both from a permitting perspective, but also on protection to existing customers and having the right other pieces in place to enable that economic development. So I think it's exciting. There's a lot of, again, it would help to have legislation passed so that we know we can rely on it, so that timeliness stays in place. And for these longer term projects, a lot of capital involved, folks can rely on them, and then they'll be ready to move quicker on them as well. So, that enabling that growth for the economy in this race to bring on AI and bringing on that computing power. If America's going to do it well, we need to get more timely, and I think that starts with permitting streamlining right now.
Right, yes. Well, there's certainly a lot of moving parts to this, and we really appreciate you coming by to help explain how some of this is going to work in the future from the public utilities perspective. So thanks again for coming by, Mr. Corwin, President and CEO of the APPA. And we'll be watching your organization to see what y'all are doing in the future.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Great to talk with you today.
Thank you. And thanks to y'all for listening as well. We'll see you on the next T&D World Live podcast.
Thanks again for listening to today's podcast, produced by Endeavor Business Media, a division of Endeavor B2B. To hear the latest information for power delivery professionals and industry best practices, subscribe to T&D World Podcast and visit our website, tdworld.com, where you can find insightful articles and sign up for our free daily newsletter.